Okay. As I was saying, I'm behind in my what I had promised because I've stumbled on JSON LD star, which made me rethink a lot of things. Also because I spent a lot of time considering the impacts of making IDs implicit. And that, thanks to Stephen, that was worthwhile exercise, thinking about the cost profile of various levels of implicit. But let me try to be more concrete. Share screen. This one.
So before we dive into that, what's the exact purpose or the reason of what we're doing now? Like a agenda, if you will.
I want to start giving concrete JSON examples of what I have in mind, because we're often stumbling.
Of which scope of the two things in consensus, or something more, or something you want to show that highlights a problem?
It's on the one hand generic topic map in RDF in JSON LD, and on the other hand it is specific to, let's start with the claim definition link, as it's a concrete example of that, because that's part of the consensus. And something, and it's a good illustration of why I'm doing things the way I do, I think. And I'll write things as I go along, because I've been playing with many options. But I'm assuming first, let's go into, can I assume some familiarity with JSON LD, or should I give just a basic JSON LD?
Basic intro, please.
Yeah, please.
Basic intro, okay, good. So basic intro to RDF even, maybe? Yes, no?
Helps for the recording, very quick.
Sure.
Very quick. Okay, so RDF has everything is a triple. So everything is a statement, they call it statement, of the form subject, predicate, object. So, you know, Canada is a country, is the predicate. It's got, and every subject and predicate is a URI representing a concept. It's supposed to be more formal. It's supposed to be more precise than natural language, but it's still a language. It's still symbols. But they're all URIs. Most triples, the object is also another, they call them resources. They don't use the term concept, because at first it was metadata for web resources. So URI represents a resource. And some of the, but a lot are just conceptual. They can be classes, property names. Class name, property names are the main cases. So the predicates are always property names. And the URIs, and they don't, like if you dereference that URI, you may not get anything. It's fine. You may get the representation in XML or JSON or something, or Turtle, of the ontology where that predicate was defined, or not. But it's still a URI. The triples, the statements, and the object of a statement may also be a literal. Literals in RDF can be strings. They can be strings representing something else, like a numeral. Then the literal has a type, which is another URI. Often when the types are taken from the XSD vocabulary by convention. So
I don't think we need all the details. I mean, the short story simply, that's a schema language, right? It defines the data. It's a metadata language.
It's RDF is a data representation which is based on sentences built out of triples, and there are schema languages built over RDF. Mm-hmm. Yes, so just to be a bit distinct. The schema language are RDF schema, OWL, and there's other possible schema languages of RDF, but those are the two main ones. And yeah, You use the key idea is you have a unified namespace, because Stephen was asking me about unified namespace, where URIs are the unified namespace. This in standard RDF, the sentences themselves don't have identity, but in RDF star, you can take a triple, put it in bracket, and say, well, this is the triple itself, and you're talking about, and you can make a statement about the statement that is used as a statement as the subject or object of another statement, which is wonderful, except the way RDF star does it, the identities are always implicit. There's tools that will translate RDF star statements to RDF using either blank nodes, probably blank nodes for the statement itself, or identities. A blank node is an unnamed RDF entity. Being unnamed means that there's complex equivalence rules where blank nodes are considered equal. Okay, so when we're doing standard RDF, when we're serializing RDF, we can do it either in a CSV-like format, which is n triples, which is subject, predicate, object, subject, predicate, object, subject, predicate, object. It's just a bunch of URIs and literals, like CSV. And it can be an n quad if we're adding a fourth term to each triple. And traditionally in RDF, when we do quad, the fourth term is for what is called known as the graph, which is basically a data container, which allows you to—
like a namespace? Or?
Like a namespace, very much. And then you have languages for expressing that a graph is a union of other graphs and so on. But Blaze graph, and there's another one now, are unique in using the fourth term of the quad for the triple identity, which allows RDF star. But most people don't use pure triple CSV because it's hard to read for a human, because you don't see the structure. You have to hunt around, okay, that object, what else is, where is that defined? What is said about it? You have no locality a priori. So a more human-friendly notation is turtle. And the turtle notation, I'll just write it quickly. It's subject, predicate, object, and then you can go object 2, object 3. So I'm expressing 3 triples here. I'm just repeating the predicate. And then I can go predicate 2, 04, 05, P3, whoops, semicolon, P3, 06, and then dot to end the sentence with that subject. And then I can go with another subject. That's just basically predicate and subject reuse. That's turtle for you. And if you enclose anything in the graph, you've got the trig format. So those are classic RDF serialization formats. They're more legible because you have things are grouped and there's less repetition. In JSON-LD, JSON-LD is interesting because it separates, it allows you to define a language. So you have something called the context, which says, well, actually this predicate, which is this long URI, I'll just use this name. Or there's this series of predicate which are in the same namespace because they're in the same ontology. So let me give the name to this short name to the namespace, and then just the predicate specific name suffix. So you start creating languages. There even you can declare in JSON-LD that a name stands for the reverse of another predicate, and this will come in handy soon. So basically you're creating a JSON schema on the fly with the context, saying, well, in this JSON, when I'm saying, and let me do somewhat formulated JSON-LD, I'm saying ID So this is the idea of my predicate, of my subject. And then I can go some predicate. So this would not be a URI because what URIs this corresponds to is defined in the context. So it's shorter, it's more legible. And then I can choose on the fly whether, oh, it could be a literal, just a string, or, well, actually it's a literal with type and language. So for example, I would have value. This is a sentence. And it's got language English. And by the way, this is something, there was a statement somewhere about no metadata in associated with sentences. And I really want to say that this is a bad idea. Language metadata is really useful. This is silly, but what does this evoke? If you're Swedish, and this is the final frame of the movie, slut means the end. So you'll see the end at the end of any movie. So language tags matter. It's a silly example, but I did want to make that point. I have other examples, but yes. And then, so you have many forms. So the predicate can be just can be for a language with a tag, or it can be a sentence without language tag, or it could be if it's a literal that is not a string, then the type will be inferred. You may use the type. That would be a different one, really. Different predicate. I can declare value A is 12 04. That doesn't matter. Let's make it proper. And then I need to disable this. I'm not taking breaks during the presentation. Thank you. And then I would say XSD date. And where XSD is the prefix of the XSD namespace that I've also defined in my context.
This is all JSON LD, what you're writing.
This is all standard JSON LD. I'm just giving you the JSON LD context.
And this is basically RDF in JSON.
Exactly. Okay. But with a lot of flexibility. And of course, this could be directly an object, another resource. So it could be, for example, namespace ID, which would be usually is how we will express the identity of an object predicate, because we know that this is we'll use a namespace name to shorten the URI of the object. And this ID is probably also namespace. Or if it's not namespace, there's a default namespace, which makes things easier, and so on. Another trick is you can declare, again, in the JSON LD context, well, this predicate is multi-valued, so actually it's fine. Just use an array of values, and each of them could be any one of those. So each of those structures can be inside an array because it's a multi-value predicate.
Okay, and what is the difference to JSON LD star now? So why
In
is that something that
JSON
matters?
LD star, let's actually move, look at quickly, and I just gave the JSON LD star. You're allowed, okay, in JSON LD star, this is an example in extended turtle. So this is a turtle triple, so subject in the default namespace. That's what the initial colon means. Predicate in the FOF namespace, which expands to this URI, and literal. So Bob FOF H, and this has certainty 0.8. So that would be this in turtle. And they say, oh, you could do that with reification. And that's how horrible reification is in standard RDF. You're saying, this is a statement. It's a blank name. It has no ID, but it is of type statement. It has this subject, this predicate, this object. So I'm creating 4 triples to reify 1 triple because I don't have quads. And then I can say this has certainty this.
Is certainty there, like, does that have to be defined separately? Or is that like arbitrary metadata you can add on?
Here it's metadata they're adding to the triple, and it's assumed that X is a namespace here, and that both Bob and, no, Bob is in the default namespace, sorry, in this base, and X in this, I think here they're saying it has no namespace, but normally there would be a namespace in ontology where you define certainty, but I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, I mean, it's arbitrary in the sense that there doesn't have to be a preceding definition of certainty there. Like,
yeah, ideally there should be. It should be part of an ontology, absolutely. But yes, here they're not doing it. And the way they're doing it in JSON LD star, and I think it's horrible, as I said, is they're making the predicate part, like this is the way they do the nameless. Well, first, the subject of the certainty, they're making the subject into the ID. So they're saying in this thing, the ID is this, but this is not the ID, it's the subject of that triple. And then they're doing the same trick here where ID is the subject of the reified triple. And the problem with using ID here, which is normally the identity of whatever you're talking about, is it should be the ID of the triple, not the ID of the subject. So I'll write to the people writing this thing. But what is important here, and this is something Stephen was suggesting very much, is if we have the triple, if we use the IPLD trick of giving a standardized identity to constructs, including the triple, then that identity can be left implicit. And that's really the question I'd like to address. Do we need to make the triple identity explicit in the transport format? And that's a real question. But why is that important, germane to our discussion? It's that, sorry, let's go back here. Here I'm assuming, suppose I have a sentence, is 0, changing climate is dangerous, it's perfectly ambiguous. It could either be interpreted as claim C1, which also matches the sentence, climate change is dangerous, or claim C2, which also matches the sentence, altering the climate through geoengineering is risky. So that's my example of an ambiguous sentence. It's not perfect, but I think it'll serve for now.
Wait. Okay, so now we're actually finally getting to some of the definitions, right?
Yeah.
In what? So if a sentence is ambiguous, is your point here that a different sentence is part of the same claim? Because when I wrote interchangeable, these two aren't interchangeable. Like, I would definitely say that altering the climate through geoengineering is risky. It's a separate claim, and changing climate is dangerous. These are two separate claims.
What I'm saying is changing climate is dangerous could be uttered with this intent. And that means it is a valid sentence with the intent of saying that. And I agree that, okay, that's a very good point about interchangeable. It's interchangeable in theory should only be done with clear, unambiguous sentence, but we'll often want to assign meanings to ambiguous sentences. I hope you agree that's a use case. And I took S0 as an example of an ambiguous sentence. We're not clear at all what it means. And of course, it's slightly improper. It's not perfect. It could be changing the climate is dangerous.
So, okay, but so you're arguing now for a different definition of claim here, right?
Am I? Okay.
You're really arguing more for a process than a definition here, right? Like, aren't you saying that, like, you know, like, if I understand that these are potentially different claims, but when someone utters, you know, the one sentence in the context of a claim, that it will need to be moderated, iteratively, you know, it would need to progress towards the other sentence in either that claim is a replacement or a new claim, but it's really more of a process thing than a definition, isn't it?
I am saying there is a process, but I just want to clear an ambiguity about the process. I think we're often identifying claims in existing documents. I do not expect a document rewriting if that's what you mean by replacing a claim by another. But I do expect
no, not in the document, but in the system, right?
Right,
like
in the system, yes. I expect that basically we'll extract the quote from the document and say changing climate is dangerous. And there's one, there may be two documents. We'll have found that sentence in two different documents, like there's two quotes from two documents. And in one, because of the document context, we'll clearly interpret it as C1. And the other will clearly interpret it as C2 because of the document context. These are identifications we'll make. This sentence in the context of this document means this and is interchangeable with that.
Okay,
and
so I can fully follow, but according to the definition that I try to introduce, these are two separate claims. I can fully agree with what you're saying, but then we should introduce separate concepts to deal with that.
Why are they two separate? Yeah, I guess I don't see why.
Activity always calls like a more specific, more generic.
If they have the same intent, aren't they two? What's
no, so are you saying that when somebody says climate change is dangerous, they exactly are referring to geoengineering?
Not exactly. I say in most cases, though, they do. Yeah. I would say that the intent of those two things in many cases are the same. Not 100%.
I'm saying I can perfectly imagine a document or more likely a conversation, because this is sloppy language. Let's be very clear, this is sloppy language, but sloppy language is frequent. But I mean, we do transcripts, right? Or at least Jamie does. And saying, you know, geoengineering is a problem and changing climate is dangerous and we don't know what could happen and blah, 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 blah. And I'm sure it can happen. And there, where you may have, here, you may have a point, Stephen, that we could separate clear, unambiguous sentences from ambiguous expressions of a claim and say that there's two kinds of links between claims and sentences. I don't think sentences, there's always ambiguity hidden in language. It's sometimes more or less well hidden, but we could single out the really, really sloppy language and give it a different kind of link. I don't have
multiple languages. I mean,
this is kind of why I wasn't all that excited at having multiple phrasings for the same claim. I see working your way towards a better phrasing of any given claim, but when you have, you know, climate change is dangerous. I mean, first of all, like you said, sometimes there's a process when you're talking to other people, right? And somebody says climate change is dangerous. The next question is, well, what do you mean by dangerous? Oh, because it's risky to do geoengineering. Yeah, in that case,
changing climate, it wouldn't apply to climate change.
Yeah, but let's take like, I'm smarter than you. What do you mean by smarter, right? And then you have, so one thing is kind of the wording was messy and something else was meant, and you talk about that other thing. Another one case is when you say kind of the general to specific situation, I'm smarter than you, or I'm better than you, I'm a better student than you, whatever, something like that. And then you discuss it and you come up with arguments that are essentially facets of what is meant by that. For example, well, I'm better in math than you, right? But I'm better in social studies, right? So in that case, it's kind of different arguments building up to a larger concept. Now, the problem with having I'm better than you being an alternate phrasing of I'm better in social studies than you, or I'm better at school than you, as being an alternate phrasing of I'm better in social studies than you, is it's suddenly misleading. And what you get when you're taking two separate documents that in the text both say climate change is dangerous, but they mean separate things, you can get somebody going into the system and saying, well, is climate change dangerous? And they search through and they find the version, the claim where climate change is dangerous, and they matched it to this general phrase. In other words, they try to prove the general by focusing on one specific case in which people can agree that's a dangerous thing. And by associating the phrase that is inexact with a more exact claim, they've somehow done a sleight of hand of proving the more general statement.
Okay, that's okay. That's a very valid point. I think I don't agree with everything you're saying, but there's definitely things to address here. First, I think that the general to specific is a very distinct link, and all of the examples you give about social science and math are examples of generic to specific, right? And certainly those are not interchangeable. And now it is true that if I say I'm smarter than you, I may have the intent of a more specific kind of smart, which is very different. But I, again, spoke sloppily, which happens all the time, and I used something more generic.
Smarter than you, but use imprecise language.
Can I intervene there? Because you bring up the word intent now. So far, in our definition of claim, there's no such thing as intent. That pretty much implies that the claim stands on its own. So,
okay. Let's get into that, because that's important.
I'm fully on board that intent is important, but if we want to talk about intent, that's probably something that we have to add on top of claims. That when you introduce a claim, you maybe can register the intent for doing so, being the source document within which it was made, etc. But
okay. There's two directions to this link. There's intent and interpretation. But in a way, it's one link, right? A sentence can have multiple interpretations. And presumably, only a few of those were intended. And I'm saying a few because in the case of poetic language, or so, in the case of newspapers headline, often make the point of intending both interpretations. It's a game that newspapers play of layering interpretations with ambiguous headlines. It's well known. But that's not the point. What I'm saying is, when you consider a sentence in its abstraction, it has multiple interpretations. But when you consider it in context, it presumably has much fewer intents than interpretations. But all language is ambiguous. Like
so you're saying that a claim always needs context right now. That means that a claim cannot live outside of context.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that at all.
Seems to be what you... Okay,
no.
How do you evaluate a claim with a set of declarative sentences without context? There's no context, there's no intent. You just got past these objects from different systems. All you have is a claim in the sentences.
What I'm saying is, for me, what I call the claim object is the interpretation. It's a more precise interpretation. The sentence can be considered abstractly, in which case it corresponds to multiple possible interpretation, because we've taken the sentence away from its we've considered the sentence without its context. Or
but
we have a quote, which is a distinct object, which is a sentence in context, which has different interpretations, and we can argue about the most likely interpretation or the most likely intent.
So, but how do you evaluate a claim outside of its context? Because this thing can live outside of its context. How do you interpret the intent of that claim?
I don't, sorry, the claim is the interpretation
Okay,
of the intent of the sentence. How do you interpret the intent of a sentence?
How do you check whether or not the set of sentences of that claim all have the same interpretation?
Well, I'm saying, well, those are this is the sentence claim link. It's, I'm claiming, that's a separate claim, that this sentence can be interpreted as this claim. That's a claim.
I could speak a little bit from our experience, which just in terms of what has occurred with users, which doesn't make it, the right answer. But there's a very common sequence in which on YSource in which a contributor makes a claim and that claim is vague, and the community needs to figure out what exactly this person is trying to say. And so there's a certain type of clarification. And how do we check the intent? The ideal is, has been in our experience that we engage with the contributor and have a conversation to try to flesh out their intent. And if that person isn't unresponsive, then the community can decide to try to determine it for themselves or just let it lie. But so when faced with a claim that is vague and then you go into the process of clarification, there's sort of a couple different outcomes. One is a straight line, and you clarify it and make it better so everyone understands what you're talking about, and you argue that thing. That's kind of the linear one. There's the road which leads to a split where people start arguing it, but it seems like people were actually arguing two different things. And once we clarify, we realize that there's two different claims with two different intents that should be out there.
Exactly. I think that's the language that I want to use. The process, I fully agree. I've experienced the same thing, but you turn the claim, the vague claim, which is a claim according to our definition, through a community process into a different claim. Hence, they are different claims. Hence, this vague sentence, changing climate is dangerous, is a different claim than altering the climate through geoengineering is risky.
So one of the goals that we want to keep, and maybe it's not within the claim though, is to have it toward when someone puts in a vague claim that the system can link to the other claims that are in there. So maybe we can handle that and discuss that later, but I just want to make sure that we all kind of agree on that goal.
Exactly, but what I'm trying to point out is that this is not an example of one claim with two different sentences. That's exactly what I try to avoid with the definition. So if you're going to present this now as an example of what you're modeling, that this is deviating from the intended definition, which by all means means that I will have to add as an example to the current definition, and we'll see.
Yeah, earlier you said that intent is not in the definition, but intent is in the definition.
No, but these two sentences are not interchangeable, is what I'm saying.
But they have.
No, that is a valid point about interchangeable. Okay, let's get deeper into that, because we are taking the problem from different ends. You keep using claim to mean the claim sentence, which, yeah, I know, but I know that's vague language too.
Down the road, because you said I don't want to support multiple languages. That's not true, of course. The reason you have different sentences related to the same claim might exactly be that you might want to link multiple translations. It might be that you want to have stupid negations, like the examples you were given in chat, or like slightly different ways of phrasing things. And yes, there will always be some community curation in whether or not they're truly interchangeable. That's the discussion we had on Hangouts. But yes, it refers to the collection of all the sentences that are interchangeable, where there's no ambiguity in the interpretation. Once there's
very little ambiguity
in the interpretation, I would argue it's a different claim because it no longer fits the definition of one claim. That's what
I understand what you're saying. Okay, first, when you say an ambiguous sentence is not the same claim, it's, for me, that is, you're again equating claim with the sentence. You're kind of, they're very close in your mind.
But they cannot.
For me, the claim is the interpretation.
They cannot exist without one another. That's why I said you cannot have a claim without a sentence. That's impossible. What on earth is a claim without a sentence?
But you can, yeah, well, it's the semiotic triangle. Yes, things are kind of bound together, but they're still distinct. They
Well,
can be inseparable with, like,
let me give an
light and
example.
shadow are inseparable but distinct.
So, Marc-Antoine, I think earlier you were
But-
saying that the relationship between a sentence and a claim is a claim.
Yes,
So in that case, we're talking about the link,
yes.
not the objects. So that is a claim that does not have a sentence, which does not fit our definition of claim. So I like the
Well-
idea of
Not really, because what you can say, and that's what I do in Socrates, I look at relevance as claims, which is the link between arguments, basically, and they can be phrased as sentences. You
they
can
can,
say,
well, they can be phrased as
"Claim
sentences,
supports that claim."
but there's not a sentence. Like you can say them as
Yeah.
a sentence, and you can have multiple ways of saying that.
Which
But
makes
there's no requirement in the definition that there's a string literal on that thing that is a
The sentence is derived data.
So
It's
that is not that does not fit our definition of claim here, and that's why I'm a little confused, because
I
this
don't care
our
how you
definition of
spell
claim
it, right?
actually has a sentence and is required to have a sentence, a string
Yeah,
literal.
and I
But it sounds
remember
like we're
saying I
using the
was
term
ho-hum
claim
about
to
that.
mean things that don't have string literals directly attached, which is
I'd
fine.
like-
I
to get back-
don't want that in the system. So I guess it depends on whether we want that. If
Want
we have
what?
to include it in our definition.
I would give it another
claims,
name.
yeah, claims as being reused for attaching or not sentences to a claim.
Okay,
I think it comes
But
down to
isn't
the
that-
intent, though. Overusing the word intent.
The,
Can I say whether we have a shared
It's like you're
goal?
telling me you don't want context anymore.
No.
Okay.
Well,
yes,
I-
it is.
let me see if we have a shared goal, though. And a phrase we've used in Canonical Debate Lab a lot is everything's debatable. So I think what Marc-Antoine's trying to get to is I want to be able, since this is a debate system, I want to be able to debate the association between the sentence and the claim ID. And I really want to be able to debate any link between any two objects in the system. And that needs to be kind of a core piece of the design. Is that
That's
true?
why-
I
That is
think
true
you're
for me.
overusing the word any, right? You're
No,
overusing
no,
the word
no,
any.
no,
Like the
he's
person
not.
who creates, the user that creates a claim. Do you want to be able to debate whether or not they created the claim?
Well, I'm starting from the assumption is, unless we state otherwise, it will be, yeah, right. So we might find some exceptions, right? But is the default assumption that every link in the system will be debatable unless we find examples? And that may be one, right? Because the system law
I think
said
it's
not debatable.
overly flexible and inefficient. I think I think this goes beyond
Yeah,
what
I know
is
you
worth
think that.
debating.
It's probably reasonable to say we need to enumerate the things we want, at least have examples of the things we want to be able to debate, right?
Yes. Can I go back to use cases, please? Because I really liked what Joshua did 5-10 minutes ago, saying what is the common usage? What is the common path? You start with an ambiguous sentence and then you debate it with the originator of the sentence, and then you replace the original sentence by more precise sentence, one or many if there's a fork. I think
Yeah,
that
and
is
I
a
would
good-
actually see. I'm not sure I agree with that process.
Okay, fair enough. But
Can I propose an alternative process just so it's out there?
Okay, but I was also
think
going
about?
to propose an alternative process, but
Okay,
if
go
you
ahead
want
and
to go-
propose yours first. No, if you go, yeah. Finish saying what you're doing.
Yeah. What I'm saying is the original sentence, the original ambiguous sentence for me had possibly, when you're asking, well, do you mean this or do you mean that? You're proposing alternative, more precise sentences, right? And what you're trying to do in that way is to disambiguate the claim. So the underlying intent or the interpretation, or which we model with more formal claims or with alternative linguistic claims, more precise linguistic claims. So basically, we're disambiguating an ambiguous linguistic claim with either more precise linguistic claims or more precise formal claims.
But before you continue,
and
that's just one simple question.
Yes.
An ambiguous claim. Well, it's a
ambiguous sentence. An ambiguous sentence, I misspoke too.
Cannot be a claim in your opinion?
An ambiguous sentence is mappable to many claims. That's what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is there's
an ambiguous sentence by itself is not a claim. So when I say God exists,
it is a claim.
Not a claim.
It is many claims because it is many interpretations. What I'm saying,
so you're saying is that a claim can have interpretations, maybe.
Yes, I'm saying a sentence has interpretations, which are the claims.
So a single sentence. Okay, I still.
Stephen, my answer to that is that an ambiguous sentence can be a claim that is not fully formalized. In other words, it's an incomplete claim that hasn't been fully fleshed out. So someone can make a claim that is just an ambiguous sentence, and people can start debating it, but it is ambiguous and is going to be messy until somebody comes and cleans that up. And one way to clean it up is just attaching context or definitions, disambiguation to it until it's clear, right? And in other words, I don't think you're making a new claim when you are disambiguating. What you're doing instead is making some of the arguments that were previously made irrelevant. And then you need to branch out the other interpretations as separate claims and move those arguments into their proper places.
The way I think about, you guys are the computer scientists much more than me, but the way I think about it is if we're defining can you hear me? The way I think about it is if a claim is like it's a structure that users are going to use, and some will use it better than others. You know, I mean, if someone makes a JPEG, that JPEG might be a shitty picture, but it's still a JPEG. And so there's sort of a discussion about what is the JPEG format, and then there's a second discussion about which are the most successful JPEGs.
Well, there's a question about, do you clean up the JPEG for them, or do you make a copy and leave the old one there?
Yes.
But it's more. I mean, there's no harm in leaving a copy, but I do see harm in leaving the unambiguous claim around too long, because people are arguing the wrong things.
Leaving the ambiguous one around too long.
Leaving the ambiguous one around too long.
What do
I
you mean
think
by
you need to disambiguate it and let the debate carry on from there, then leaving the old one there for people to continue adding arguments when they don't understand exactly what is being meant by that
but
claim.
it's a curation mechanism. I mean, these are all different things. The bottom line, the thing I'm asking is the ambiguous thing a claim or not? And then you can still argue, yeah, well, we can block a discussion on ambiguous claims and redirect them to more precise claims.
Yeah. So I would say, yes, it's a claim. It's a partially defined claim, right?
So
it is a claim. It can accept arguments or whatever a claim we plan to do with a claim, but
I mean, what
shouldn't be left in that state. Yeah.
Sorry. What to do with it is a platform decision, right? It's still a claim, like.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And if it is a claim, do we still agree it has sentences or not?
Yes.
The definition in the Trello board says a claim can be expressed with a sentence. It doesn't have to be.
Well, okay. I would say have to.
I would say a good claim, the best claims are using complete sentences, but it is probably possible for a user to express a claim, the intent of a claim, or that to be understood by a number of users if their third grade grammar teacher would say that's not a sentence, if that makes sense.
Also, it begs the other question, which is, will two sentences or a paragraph, can that be a claim, right? Which is often entered into our systems, right? Somebody
Well,
writes the claim. I did that, you know, write the claim, then you add more clarifying sentences with it, right?
according to the current definition, no, because a declarative sentence is a sentence, and two sentences is not a declarative sentence. That's why we define declarative sentence in the glossary.
Right,
Okay.
I understand. I'm just opening up because we didn't explicitly discuss that. I'm opening it up as a possibility. I think I still agree it should be a declarative sentence. And I think it has to have a declarative sentence. Actually, we've already gone to say one or more declarative sentences, which is what we're talking about right now.
Okay, let's get, when I said many to many, I meant it. So S0 is my ambiguous sentence. And it may be discovered afterwards, or it may be discovered at first, but ultimately the final state of the system I expect is people will, oh, do you mean this?
So
And
can you give a concrete example? Because you're modeling, I know what you mean, and what you're showing here is not aligned with what I introduced as a definition of claim. So if this is what you're suggesting, then I'm going to add some examples to the current definition of claim, and we need to see as a group whether or not we can agree with that. Because I think the definition will lose its purpose if you're already going to model this.
It's proposing a different definition of claim.
I don't think I'm proposing a different definition.
Well, according to Stephen,
I'm a bit surprised. I'm serious.
I'll add one example to the not a claim list of the current definition. I'll uncheck everyone, and I'm pretty certain you're not going to check again.
Okay, but I want to be sure that you understand what I'm claiming, because I really don't get that impression from the conversation.
Yeah.
To be honest, because the way I keep saying, I get the impression you see the claims and sentences as equivalent, because, and I do it too. I mean, but I keep hearing claim for something that for me is a sentence and not a claim.
Because they cannot exist without one another. That's the whole point. You cannot have a claim without sentences.
Fair enough, but that doesn't mean they're the same thing. As I said, light and shadow cannot exist without another, but that they're not the same thing. It's as profoundly different.
Yeah,
and when
example.
Yes, thank you. So this is the same as 0, changing climate is dangerous. And then I'm asking the person who said that, oh, do you mean climate change is dangerous? And they'll say yes, that's S1. Do you mean that? So I'm giving another sentence. And then they say yes. So, okay, we see that both I'll create a unifying claim structure, which hopefully I can formalize. And I'll say both these sentences can be, or at least have been once uttered with intent C1. Now it's clear.
S0 are both.
Those are sentences. These are
okay,
sentences.
One is changing climate is dangerous. The other one is climate change is dangerous. Okay.
Yeah. This is changing climate is dangerous, which I see as much more ambiguous, whereas I see climate change is dangerous as not ambiguous, or much less. It's all relative, but I see this as a, and maybe this can be made less ambiguous. I'm supposing there's a, kind of ideal non-ambiguous expression of this, which would be S1. And I'm saying, okay, then I can create a structure, and I will probably say, well, you know what, this one, I'll probably make it canonical, or...
They're not the same claim. I mean, I can already interrupt you here. They're not the same claim.
No, they're not the same claim. Okay.
Changing climate is dangerous, different from saying the result of climate change. These are two separate claims.
No, we're getting there. We're getting there. Please listen. I'm saying, if somebody says this, and then when you ask, you say, do you mean climate change is dangerous? And they say yes, then you say, okay, both those sentences were uttered with the intent. And maybe that doesn't mean that the sentence illustrates the claim well, but it was uttered with the intent. This abstract structure, which I suppose is a formal thing and better defined because it's using a formal language. And we may agree that this S1, and we should agree that one sentence very well expresses this unambiguous abstract formal construct. So this one, let's make it red or something, because it's the canonical one. And or maybe somebody else says the same sentence, changing climate is dangerous, and I ask, do you mean that? And they'll say, no, I mean really altering the climate through geoengineering is risky. Oh, so I'll create a new sentence and say, have this link to say, this sentence has been uttered to make that formal claim, which is better expressed through this, and I can make that canonical again, better expressed through this other sentence. So this is what I mean by many-to-many. There's a many-to-many between this is a good representation of that formal claim, and this is a crappy representation of that formal claim, but there's still a link between that sentence has been uttered with this statement. This is what I mean by this. And when you're saying, is it the same, is the sentence not the same claim? No, it's not. It's not the same sentence, trivially. What is the meaning of the sentence? Well, it's probably, without context, it's the set of all possible interpretations for it, I guess, because we have no context, so we don't know the true intent. And yes, I agree that the set of possible interpretations for this one is very different from the set of possible interpretations for that one. And in that way, they're not the same claim. But this sentence can express that claim, that intent, whereas this sentence can also express that other claim, that other intent. And I agree that being ambiguous, its intent set is different from the intent set of the other sentence.
Yeah, and why do
But
we
when I
model
say
intent?
claim, I mean intent.
So, when I was saying another process, I imagine my approach is much more sterile.
Much more.
And removed from the human interaction that you have described. So I would see something like this as being climate. What is it? Climate. Changing climate is dangerous, right? That would just be thrown out there in a system, and people would start debating it. That somebody would want to disambiguate, and at that point, this, instead of going and saying, "What did you mean by that?" Breaking off every possible meaning that people see into separate debates, because even if the original poster had an intention, all of the intentions that one could talk about, including straw man or whatever, are interesting to debate, or at least if people are debating that, should be preserved. So that
which is exactly what I'm doing.
It's what you're doing. Okay, yeah, but what you are maintaining is you're preserving the messiness so that people can see that, yeah, you said that, but you meant that. And I'm not sure that maintaining that messiness is a benefit to the system, as opposed to, at best, kind of extra garbage, and at worst, could be misleading in the sense that I mentioned before.
Okay.
So like a preemptive split. I'm just going to go ahead and split all the ideas you might have meant, and here they are. Which one do you want to engage with?
Yeah, it could be that, like, it's got no context, right? And somebody says, well, okay, well, I think this is what they meant, and they put in the context, right? You assume that the system has notifications for people to come back and see what's been going on, and they'll be like, no, that's not at all what I meant. What do? They don't go back and say, no, that's not what I meant. Remove, change the context. They go, no, fork this. This is fork this, and they put in their own context for the debate they meant to be having, and hopefully revise the sentence to be clearer, which is something that we haven't talked about the process, and I haven't thought through the process of the best way to do that. But I would want to see that sentence revised to be clearer as well, rather than maintaining the same sentence with completely different meanings, if it can be expressed through language.
And what I'm claiming, Tim, is that when you go through this whole process you described, you'll probably end up with pretty much this data structure. Maybe
Except
you'll
the
say,
S0. I think the S0, I don't want the S0 to be there.
well, you may choose to discard the S0, fair enough. But I'm saying there is this inadequation. There is this inadequation between the sentences and their intended meaning, that so that you'll transform S0 into S1, S2, and you'll say, oh, but you did say there would be multiple meanings assigned to a sentence, and that's your old notion of context. So
Right.
you've got at least one side of the one-to-many.
So this is a question we haven't gone all the way through, and
you've
it's hard to
also
answer.
admitted, you've also admitted the other side, because there's the like you've admitted many. Okay, maybe you want to have only one canonical sentence per meaning, but you've kind of said, okay, sometimes there's multiple meaning per sentence. And you've also kind of accepted sometimes there are multiple sentences by meaning thanks to negation. And yeah, okay, you might decide to flag the S0 as it's ambiguous, I want to throw it out. You might even garbage collect it. Fine.
Here's the distinction, I think. I do agree that there could be multiple interpretations, but there are two kinds of multiple interpretations, right? There's the question is, what is the best way to phrase this claim, right?
That is one question, yes.
Right, and that is debatable, but we can go into the details on what we mean by debate here, because I don't know if it's done by claims. But anyway,
yes.
Yeah, no, I know you would, but that's why that's one of the decision points. Anyway,
absolutely.
But the example of climate change is dangerous is
changing climate
is an example in which, by refining what the person meant, I think it would be better to replace the sentence than to maintain. Okay, wait.
I agree.
Okay, and by replacing, I mean get rid of the crappy language.
Which I wouldn't.
You're right.
So why is it so critical to remove the claim from it rather than allowing the platform to handle it how they see fit? You're just not displaying it, whatever. Like, why is it so critical to remove it outright?
Because, and we can discuss this more. You know, we may decide the other way, but my opinion is it's a lot of garbage. You know, I say preserve history. I don't mean remove it from history, right? So it can be there in older versions. But
yeah, but really, again, like that's just a platform thing. Like, for instance, in White Source, we try not to surface, you know, these original ambiguous whatever versions. Like, you know, we do it as versions and whatever, but still the intent is, you know, hide these crap claims from the users and focus everyone's effort on the real claims, right? Like,
true.
It sounds to me like we're not saying things all that divergent.
And I'll go further. There's usefulness to keeping them, in that if somebody comes again and reiterates the ambiguous claim, which I'm sure will happen all the time, then we can tell them, listen, this was already proposed. It was decided it was ambiguous. You could be meaning either this or this, which one? Yeah. And we've cut a lot of crap.
I have to run. We're hitting 11 o'clock. But one thought that this conversation spurs for me is I could imagine our Trello board. I could imagine proposing a split on the definition of claim into two definitions. One being the minimum.
I just updated mine basically on that split based on this discussion, so we can add.
So maybe you've done what I was gonna suggest. One definition that is the minimum acceptable claim. So a user enters this, and what is the minimum threshold? And if they don't do X, then we say, sorry, you have to try again. And then another definition of our ideal claim. Just a thought. But Stephen, I like how you've been guiding the process. So you know, as a take it or leave it for the group, but it's a thought that occurs to me as something we could try at some point.
Well, for me, the main point is that we're no longer aligned on the definition of claim, and that's why I dragged it back, because I mean that was very relevant. I think this whole discussion was relevant to uncover that, and I updated my proposed definition accordingly. Yeah, I suggest everyone to look at it again, add competing
I will.
definitions again. I dragged it back to alignments. And indeed, Joshua, if that means that we need to maybe split it up into 2 different definitions, I think that's a great way to go about it as well, because both concepts are probably useful. But I have my reasons for wanting this basic building block because it's more atomic, if you will. I think the whole curation, which I agree with, by the way, everything you present, Mike Antoine, I agree with, but I still want to maintain a more, a different definition of claim.
Okay, that may be how we'll name things.
Goodbye, everybody.
But I just want to point out, I thought we were aligned, and I'm surprised we're not, because I don't see what I'm proposing as incompatible with the definition that was proposed. But I'll read your revised definition. I'll try to formulate mine as a definition.
It has to do with down the road where you want to model intent. Like, I think that's what it boils down to. Like, it's a different way of talking about it. The way I would talk about it is saying, oh, I have a different intent, and you say, actually, I'm making a different claim or a more specific claim. Whereas you saying, oh, it was the same claim all the time or whatever. I mean, it's really semantics, but I think semantics are important.
Yeah, they're very important. I think, and I want to check that with you. When you replace a sentence, a vague sentence by a more precise sentence, are you, basically you're looking at the sentences as the core of the claim, right?
Yeah.
There's no underlying concept that is behind them. You're just saying,
concept is determined by the set of sentences. It's as
okay,
a whole.
not for me.
It's the whole that as a claim.
And that's really the difference. For me, the sentence's meaning is really contained in a more formal interpretation, and the sentences are just pointers to interpretations.
And then
I'm actually more on Mark.
My question is, if you model it like that, where and who and how does it, where is interpretation? Like, for me, a claim as a whole, if you get that handed over to a person as a package, the ideal is that everyone comes to the same interpretation of that claim. Yes. That same interpretation can be, oh, this is an ambiguous claim. It can be, oh, this is a very specific claim, but it's the same claim. That's the goal.
Okay. And for me, when there's an ambiguous claim, there's actually a superposition of precise claims, which needs to be identified.
True. I'm not denying that, but those are different claims.
But
adjusting language-wise is you can have a vague claim.
You can have a vague linguistic claim.
You can have also more specific claims that can relate to each other, as Bentley suggested, where you say, oh, these are more specific claims of this vague, ambiguous claim.
Okay, and okay, this is important. We'll get into the difference between, hi Jack, the difference between intent and interpretation. The sentence has multiple interpretation. The sentence in context, we can try to determine the intent, which is distinct. Which is taken a subset of the interpretations, right? And the context helps disambiguate the intent.
Do I understand correctly that Stephen suggests that S0 on your diagram is also a claim?
Yes, you understand. I think that's what Stephen is saying. Well, yeah, he's treating the sentences as claims. He does not, or he's not, if I got it well, he's not treating claims as independent from the sentences.
Yep. Because they cannot be independent. It's the collection that makes up the claim.
Yeah.
And that can be ambiguous. That's claims can be ambiguous. That's true.
But I think Bentley made this great example of there can be claims that have this implicit declarative sentence, like they can have a formulation, but they don't need to.
Well, I don't know whether I'd use the term claim for that. That's kind of, I was interpreting what Marc Antoine was saying, but one of the core things that I want to see in the system is to be able to debate any action that happens within the system. So if someone says this is not a claim or this is ambiguous, I want to be able to debate that using the debate system. I don't want to have to build a separate curation system, because this is a curation system.
I think that's a separate discussion, right?
Right. So we can have that later. Maybe we should just go ahead and go down this path. But at some point, we're going to have that discussion, and it may mean rewriting the definition of claim, or maybe coming up with another term.
That's what we're doing now.
Yeah.
And I see where the conflict lies. And I think the best way to resolve it is by going over alternate definitions of claims.
Yeah, I think at this point, I'm beginning to see where we differ in definitions, and I'm now able to write something different.
Yeah. Marc-Antoine and Stephen, do you think it makes sense that you both do a one-on-one to agree on a definition, that we have a base to discuss with the others?
Well, I think we almost had a one-on-one this hangout.
Yes.
No, but it's still different. It's something different.
No, I think we're at the agree to disagree point. But in a way, I keep saying there's two objects, and one of them will be called claim. And for me, it was the one that is not the same as the sentence, because we kind of had agreed on sentence, or we had linguistic claim and formal claim at some point. And maybe I need to define formal claim, but for me, there's two objects and they need two names, and we don't agree which one to attach the label claim on. But there's also the question of how do we treat ambiguous formal claims, and
that's again a separate discussion, I think. Well, let's first agree on what a claim is, and then we can discuss how to treat ambiguous claims. But we first really need to agree on what a claim is. That's the whole point.
Yeah,
but if you can please add your definition. The examples I added to the current definition that I added, if I'm not mistaken, right now you will disagree with the definition, because there's going to be an example you disagree with, the one you just presented. Okay. And then add your definition that fixes that somehow, that for you is a valid definition.
Okay.
And I think then we can discuss like what are the benefits of each, etc. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, but I may avoid the use claim. I may go into formal claim, linguistic claim, or something like that, because a lot of the hurdle is we have two concepts. We both know we have two concepts, and we keep stumbling on which one will bear the claim hat.
I have the impression when you go to formalisms, you magically think it is defined because it's formal. My whole point is that it will not be defined until you attach meaning to it, and that is by the sentences, that is by defining it, that is by, I mean, you can have this abstract concept of this abstract claim, but if you don't define what it is or not is, it's just a random node in your system.
Yes, it is, and I agree with you. Saying it's formal doesn't magically give it meaning. Agreed. It doesn't have meaning until it's given meaning somehow. Agreed. Not necessarily through sentences. It can be from formal building blocks. There's two ways to zoom in on the formal meaning. One is through intersection of linguistic claims or accumulation of linguistic claims, and the other is through formal building blocks.
Yeah,
but I agree it's not magic.
I disagree there, but my general point and why we start with declarative sentences is that these formal building blocks can be represented in the end as a declarative sentence. That's my current understanding of the formal building blocks you've presented before.
Yeah, and I said they can be sometimes, maybe, and maybe here we disagreed on can, might be, or I should have said maybe. It's not a given.
Then indeed you should introduce a definition that doesn't rely on declarative sentence and give an example of one that. Yeah.
Absolutely fair. Absolutely fair.
But I think with 10 minutes overtime, and Bentley hasn't called an end to the meeting yet.
Well, other people said they were leaving and called at the end, so I figured that was sufficient. So we were kind of closing. So yeah, so let's. Oh,
and you stopped recording.
No. Oh, no? Okay. I didn't. No, it's still recording. Good. Sometimes it does that. Yeah, let's go ahead and close it off, and then we'll look at everyone, kind of look at the definitions. I might agree with more than one definition, because I think at this point I don't care, because it's going to change. So we'll see.
Can I add one more flag to come back to later, which we seem to be quite divergent on the notion of intent. and how that plays into it, and fully agreed that that's a next item, but might be good to discuss offline and try to make some progress.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks everyone.
Okay. Thank
Thanks,
you very
everyone.
much. Goodbye.